Hello, welcome to my channel, Balance Sheets Matter. I just watched this video from Valuetainment. Did the US government just manipulate the inflation rate? Where basically Patrick suggests that the recent changes of how CPI weighting is done in January have been done to manipulate the inflation rate and make it look lower. Well, the fact is he's completely wrong about that and apparently doesn't even understand the basics of how inflation is calculated and what this actual weighting change is. What he basically says is complete gibberish. So I'm going to go over, we're going to watch this quick little part where he explains how the government's just manipulated the inflation rate. And then I'm going to explain basically in 1 to 2 minutes at the end of the video how the inflation rate actually changed. And it's going to really make inflation a lot clearer, and understanding it's a very important thing. So let's jump into the video.
Telling us inflation today is 6.5%, give or take. Yeah, inflation is fine at 6.5%. It's not really as bad as you think it is. And a lot of people are confused saying, how is that even possible? Because chicken's up 10.5%, butter is up 26%, milk is up 50%, egg 170% in certain markets, coffee 13%, baby food 10%, rice and pasta 15%, bread 15%. How is it possible if all of these things are up the way they are for you to say inflation is only up 6.5%? Yet if you go to the official versus the shadow stats of how we used to measure inflation, you will notice if you look at the blue versus the red shows.
So I'm just going to quickly just say shadow stats is complete nonsense. Once I explain how inflation is calculated at the end of this, you'll see using the previous weightings from basically 30-40 years ago makes absolutely zero sense. So let's just continue.
That inflation is only 6.5%. But blue, the top, shows we're somewhere between 13 to 14% inflation. But this isn't the only thing that you have to see what happened. Just this year, if you go on the BLS website, US Bureau of Labor Statistics, they announced something very quietly. I don't know if you heard about it or not. Matter of fact, I'd love to know if you heard about it. If you did, comment below. It said beginning with the January 2023 index scheduled for publication on February 14, 2023, BLS plans to update the spending weights in the calculation.
Okay, I hope you all heard that. The spending weights in the calculation, the weights of the different items in CPI.
Of the CPI every year instead of every 2 years. So you may say, I don't get it. What's the big deal with that? Let me explain to you what the big.
Unfortunately, Patrick, you don't understand either how inflation is calculated and how these changes.
Big deal of this, and just kind of see the optics. If you look at the historical rates, we're just going to go back 5 years. Do you see that? How it goes January, February, March, all the way down to December and the years. So the old way of measuring inflation, let's just look at February of 2023. It says it's 6%, right? So if we do the old way of how much inflation is higher, you would measure it from 6% to February of 2021. And they would have to say inflation is up 4.3% than what it was 2 years ago. Versus the new way of measuring it, they have to go from February, which is 6%, to last year, which was 7.9%.
Okay, so if you actually understand inflation, you would know right away what he said here is just complete nonsense. What the calculation he's making basically makes no sense. So let's just jump into the consumer price index and see actually what changes the government made. So if you actually go to the BLS's website, you can look at these very detailed breakdowns, and they have all the different items, and this is, in this column here, it's the relative importance, the weighting. So for example, food is about 13.5% of the total 100% weighting. So they're basically saying CPI is calculated on every $100 you spend, we're saying 13.5 of that went to food, and then they calculate the inflation rate. And we can go down this report and see all the specific breakdowns. So what actually the government change they made was because these numbers can change every month, and they want to kind of smooth it out so these weightings aren't rapidly changing every month based on seasonality and, you know, just overall short-term changes in the prices of various goods and services. So before they used to look at 24 months. So it would look at how much of every $100 you spent every month for the last 24 months. And that average percentage you spent basically is going to be what we see here in the relative importance. So now how they're doing it is they're actually only looking at the last 12 months and the relative weighting of how much of every $100 you spent on food, and then averaging out the last 12 months to give you that number. So the funny thing is about this is it actually has the exact opposite implication that Patrick from Valuetainment was saying in his video, as items like food, for example, which he is correctly pointing, have been running quite hot in inflation, as they're running hot because we're only using a shorter measurement to get that average. They're actually going to be weighted higher. So that's actually going to make the overall inflation rate look higher in comparison to how it was before. And we can even see this in food, because with the new calculations, the last 12 months, its weighting was 13.5%. But I don't have the report here, but if we looked 1 year ago, the weighting was only 13.4%. So as food was a hotter inflationary item, it actually is being considered a more larger piece of the pie of inflation. So I hope you understand how inflation works now. And you can also see, for example, why shadow stats, using the basket of goods of where we used to spend our money 40 years ago, makes no sense today, because all the weightings, there's like a lot have changed. A lot of the weighting now is in shelter, for example. Shelter is almost 35%, and that makes sense because a lot of people's income now goes to paying for their shelter. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions about inflation, you can leave them below. And remember to like, share, and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next video.